previous time on my channel I did a video about the Nosferatu list from Mikey Newman, and we discussed the entire list, going through the different choices, why there's some choices in the list, why there are not some other choices in the list. And this video I'll just give a bit of some thoughts on how to deploy the list, how to move in the first couple of turns, what will happen in the first couple of turns. And then hopefully that will help you with your games with this list or a similar list in the future. Here we can see the entire list. I am going to set it up for a frontline clash scenario, so just 12 inches away from the center. I'm not focusing on any secondary objective because, well, that can influence the game obviously, but then I would have to go through 6 different options, and that would make for quite a long video. So we'll just go for a 1-by-1 deployment. I generally don't drop for first unless the situation arises that it's really interesting. So I'll just discuss what kind of decisions I would make in a 1-by-1 drop. So here in this list, these Phantomos models, I don't have any designated bat swarms. So normally the models that I use here for the vampire spawn, I use as bat swarms. Now I have to use just Phantomos as stand-ins. So I would normally with Vampire Covenant, I would start with dropping your light chaff units, so either the Great Bats or the Bat Swarms, because with advanced 6 or 12 for the Bat Swarms and 9-18 for the Great Bats, they're quite mobile. Normally you don't need them in the first turn of the game, and then even then if you have 2 units, then usually you can still get with 1 unit to the place where you want to go to chaff other people. You have to be aware of well, your desire to still put some other units in front of the bat swarms or the great bats for that matter. So be careful just to deploy them backwards enough so that your other units still fit in front. Yeah, this list has 2 units of skeletons, a unit of ghasts. This is combat focused stuff that is not that mobile. Otherwise it has winged reapers and it has vampire spawn, and these are quite mobile. So basically with the skeletons or the ghasts, you kind of tell your opponent just point blank where the rest of these units are going to be, because if you drop the skeletons, then yeah, you are going to put the other skeletons next to them, you are going to put the ghasts close to them. So if you put any of these units down, it's a giveaway for your opponent. So in that respect, it might be better to first put your vampire spawn and maybe also the winged reapers down. However, the winged reapers are also already a lot less mobile than the vampire spawn. The direwolves are also still a good choice for this. The direwolves, they are really list and matchup dependent in their value. So if you play against the rush list, and you can just buy an extra turn by sacrificing your direwolves, dropping for first, using the direwolves as vanguard, and then 9-inch move, or if you do manage to get your general within 12 inches, 18-inch move, then you can block off the entire army ideally for a turn, and then buy an extra magic phase basically. And that is really important for this list because the magic is quite potent. So just now you saw me measuring the distance from the mage bunker quite often to some different units. The units you want to be within 6 inches of are the both skeleton units, because you really want to be able to cast your arises and increase the amount of skeletons that you start with. So this mage bunker has to be within 6 inches of these two, and then otherwise your general has to be within 12 inches of the pieces that you want to be able to march in the first turn of the game. In addition, the bat swarms on the left that I placed just as one of the first deploys to bait my opponent into thinking that I could still go anywhere. They went there because of that reason, and then now I can still check that their move is not affected too much by the deployment of the mage bunker in the position where it is. Yeah, then we also have the Winged Reapers that come into play. So the Winged Reapers, they fill in the hole between the ghasts and the bat swarms. And because they are quite mobile still, they have also advanced 6 with Swift Stride, so they do threat also quite a bit. They can keep enemies away quite effectively. We also see that the Direwolves in the end ended up on the left. Basically, their goal is to delay the enemy army, hopefully for a turn. So in the position where they are now, if your opponent is getting the first turn, I'm just marking out the 12-inch line for the opponent. But if he's getting the first turn, that you might not want to put them in a position where they are, because they can already get charged, and actually they will give your opponent more movement than normally it would be. But yeah, I think it's this is quite a good deployment for the list. So the important parts in your deployment for this list will be to have the important units within 6 inches of your character bus. The vampire spawn can go on a flank. They do benefit from being within 12 inches of your general and being within 12 inches of the BSB, because then you can suddenly deploy them facing the enemy. So the enemy can bait you with a frenzy test in that case by deploying something or moving something within 15 inches of them. I believe it's 15, maybe even 16. But then if he does that, then you're going to be quite fine, because you have a maximized discipline 9 with a reroll. You're quite likely to make that, so most opponents will probably not go for that with anything valuable. So even a chaff unit would be quite a sacrifice to just draw at your vampire spawn. Yeah, I think in this sense you protect your flanks of your skeletons also quite well. So on one side you have the ghasts, and the ghasts, they can hold up against pretty much anything with their, let's see, 24 resilience, 5 wounds with regeneration 4 plus because of the card. So that should be quite okay. On the other hand, well, you have the hill that you can protect with the vampire spawn, and anyway, it's quite good for this list to stay somewhere where you can protect your flanks of your skeletons. So either this side with the hill or the left side of the board with the impossible terrain in the middle of the field. That could be quite nice. Impossible terrain, if it's further up ahead in the board, it is also limiting in what you can do yourself. And this list, it is a bit of a bunkering list in the sense that you play really close to yourself, and you don't necessarily in the first turns of the game want to play wide. However, if you start to increase the size of your skeletons, you might still be able to play a bit wider in the future. And especially your vampire spawn will just go crazy over the battlefield, hopefully. And your winged reapers can also do the same, basically. So after having done the deployment, we'll go into the first turn. So assuming that your opponent doesn't threaten you in the first turn that much, I'm just going to move forward. So moving forward with Vampire Covenant, I believe is really important, because then you take up the board space that you definitely need in order to raise your skeletons and your zombies. Because now you can see that after my deployment, I am quite clustered up. I don't even have the space to just raise fully my skeletons, or at least increase them in their size. So I think it's quite important to just move them up. You don't really have to be aggressive with Vampire Covenant. It's more about playing passive aggressive, I think. So in the list, you also have a couple of snipe spells that you can utilize to put pressure on your opponent to make them come to you. And I think that is one of the main strengths of this Nosferatu list, because you have Hasten the Hour, you have Touch the Heart. I believe they both work at 24 inches. So you can quite effectively snipe, and either if you snipe, well, if you snipe, you get a wound, and if you don't snipe, then probably you will get your rises on the skeletons, and maybe a perception of strength to knock up the combat potential of your ghasts or to debuff your opponent. One thing I didn't go into yet is how to play the skeletons. So one of the units has a Rending Banner with halberds, and the other unit has a Legion Standard with Hand-Weapon Shield. The Legion Standard one I would always play 5 white, just as many ranks as you can, just to get a rank bonus. Up to maybe a certain point where the unit gets really unwieldy, and then you might go for 6 white, just to make your unit a little bit less deep. The halberd unit is an interesting one. I think I would just march them up 5 white, and then once you know your matchup, basically, you know what enemy unit goes into it, you can decide to go wider, go into horde formation even, with your skeletons, and try to just grind down the opponent. Obviously, you're not going to get your rank bonus anymore, and obviously it's only 8 attacks from skeletons that you will be gaining, so you do sacrifice quite something, because if you're 7 white, then you're going to get 14 attacks. If you're 8 white, you're going to get, 24 attacks, so that's a difference of 10 attacks. So if your 10 attacks can gain you 3 wounds, then it's worth it, basically. And that is the scenario. That is the scenario when you get Perception of Strength off, basically, on your skeletons against a Resilience 3 target. So if your opponent is Resilience 3, you have your skeletons in a favorable matchup, you can speed up the process with a Perception of Strength. And if you don't, well, it probably evens out, because you have 10 attacks extra that hit on 4+, that wound on 3+. So that should be about 3 wounds. So if you don't get any supportive magic up on these guys, then it's a bit of a toss-up between being 7 white or being 8 white in terms of your combat res. Losing combats is not that big of a deal with Vampire Covenant skeletons, as long as you don't lose by 20 or something. Generally, with Vampire Covenant, anvils work really well because, well, you give your opponent the choice of charging in or not. If he does not charge in, then, well, he gives the initiative to you, which is great, because then you can suddenly decide where to go. If he charges in, then it's also great, because the next turn is going to be your turn. So this is Vampire Covenant specific, basically, where you rather be charged than to charge yourself, because if you charge, then the next turn you don't have a magic phase to raise your units back up. Whilst if your opponent charges you, you will have the following magic phase. You can use that to arise back your lost models, and you will be coming up on top on the matchup, probably, and you'll also be able to countercharge, obviously, with your supporting pieces. I think in this list, it's also quite nice to have the Winged Reapers and the Vampire Spawn with flying, because you are congesting yourself quite a bit in terms of unit movement. So having something that can do a supportive charge, even when it's being blocked basically by your own units, that is really valuable. The only thing to be afraid of really is stuff that can get to your Mage Bunker. But for this, once again, you also have the Winged Reapers that can... Basically, they are an extra unit. So the skeletons, by going from pure anvil roll to something of an offensive unit also, that changes the way that your core works in Vampire Covenant. Because suddenly these skeletons, they can go wide, they can dish out damage. And you're supported by these casts. With Corpse Guard, you're gonna be quite resilient, so suddenly your Winged Reapers can just play around to protect your Mage Bunker, basically. And that also gives the combined benefit of never having your Winged Reapers out of Inspiring Presence range. I realize that this might be a bit of a random video in this sense, but we're just talking random tactics about this list here. I hope that it was still useful to a lot of you, and well, next week we'll start on with the next bloodline that we discussed, so that's going to be Lamia, if I'm correct. Yeah, just let me know what you think of this, and see you the next time.